Hello, everybody. This is not Britain's Hangout Hour. This is another discussion. I am back. I am Britain, also known as Some Okie Dude, and I am back here today with Colin from Colin's Corner. How you doing, man?
I am doing great. Glad to be having this discussion for a book that I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, we did this back in January, and some stuff happened, but don't worry, I figured it out, and now we are back. We're talking about Susanna Clarke's Piranesi today. Um,
Dude, baby.
it's funny that we're actually talking about this now because I'm actually going to start Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell next month. So this worked
How are
out.
you?
Yeah. I don't know how long that's gonna take because it's a chunky boy, but yeah, Piranesi though is like let me see how long my copy is.
I think my
Two.
copy was like 244 or something. For
Yeah,
some reason,
mine's
that
two
number
forty
sticks out.
five. So
Okay.
there we go. But
Much
Piranesi,
shorter.
Piranesi, fans of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell waited about, God, when did that come out? 2004? 2005? Let me look
That
at the
that
beginning here.
sounds right.
Um, it was in the early 2000s. Let me look it up on my phone. But, Colin, if you want to introduce yourself for the, like, 5 or 6 people who don't know who you are, feel free.
Absolutely. I am Colin. My channel on YouTube is Colin's Corner. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, where I am somewhat active, probably less active than I'd like to be, but yes, if you are unfamiliar with my channel, I like to talk about books, mainly fantasy and horror. I'm going to be getting into some sci-fi and just kind of exploring, pushing my reading boundaries a little bit this year. So there might be some curveballs thrown in. But yeah, come on over to Colin's Corner and check me out.
Yes, Colin has become a friend of the channel, and like I said, we recorded a bit of this, but it didn't really didn't pan out for undisclosed reasons. But we're back here talking about Piranesi today, which is Susanna Clarke's long-awaited follow-up to Jonathan Strange, Mr. Norrell, which, like I said, I'll be doing next month. So glad to be here. I'm glad, glad we made it. It's been a laborious 2 months. Let me tell you, it's been tough, man. Getting reading in, you know.
Yeah, we're both students, and there's just I feel like I'll go through like 3 or 4 days where I'm just like busting out a bunch of schoolwork and might not get like any reading done unless I'm doing an audiobook. And then I'll be a little bit caught up and then I'll have like 3 or 4 days where I can just actually, if I'm not exhausted and dead tired at the end of the night, read for a little while. So it's tough during semesters.
It's about how I felt like February. This happened last year, but for some reason February just it's a whirlwind, man. I didn't really have a lot of time to read much, though I'm catching up on some stuff. I finished In Cold Blood, which we're not covering here. We decided on we're like, no, that would take too much energy to do. So yeah, we're probably gonna have In Cold Blood on Colin's channel, or at least I hope so. It was his idea. I would feel weird having it on here anyway. Um,
That's the plan.
but yeah, Piranesi. We were gonna have Laura from Fantasy Awash on here, but sadly she couldn't make it because she was busy with other things. So you are missed, Laura. But you know what, Colin? I think we're gonna have a good time. I think we're gonna have a good time here today. Um,
We did the first time.
we did the first time, yes. You had some interesting theories about what was going on in Piranesi, so I'm really looking forward to hearing that again and letting the audience hear it. Oh, yes, because that would be nice. Um, but yeah, Piranesi. So, how does one pitch this book? So there's a guy called Piranesi, who is stuck in this mysterious house, with this other person called the Other. And a lot of it is just them chilling out. trying to find this thing called the Great and Secret Knowledge, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. If anyone has read
Yep, that's it.
Piranesi and want to correct us, if or correct me if I, or well, Colin, if you want to correct me as well. Uh, and a mystery. A game is afoot, as Sherlock Holmes would put it. So, yeah, Piranesi. Colin, since you're the guest, I'm going to let you go first. What are your like? What were your initial thoughts after you read Piranesi?
I think my initial thoughts were pretty great because as people who read frequently, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but we get used to things in specific genres, especially in genre fiction, where we're picking up a fantasy book, we have a certain mental schema for what this may end up looking like, or a sci-fi book, horror, kind of know what you're getting into. But with Piranesi, I had heard so many things about people very vaguely talking about how unique Piranesi is because it's very difficult to talk about in a non-spoiler way for very long.
Oh yeah. By
But
the
by the
way,
time I
oh, sorry, Colin. I don't mean to
go ahead,
interrupt
no,
you, but before we really get into it, we're gonna spoil this. So when you watch this, read this, come back here, and we'll probably stay when we get into spoilers. So yeah, sorry, Colin. Continue what you were saying.
no, you're good. That's a very important thing to say. But yeah, I think like my thoughts at the end before I had any distance between finishing the book, like my just initial Matt's fantasy book reviews take on Piranesi was like that was different in a good way. It was, it's listed as a fantasy novel, but it felt like its very own unique thing, uh, and I think it was extremely well executed personally, and I really enjoyed it. It was one of my books of the year last year.
For me as well. It was a really interesting it was definitely a oh, what do you call it? It was unique in the same way that something like Perdido Street Station or Black Leopard Red Wolf was really different reading for me. Though I don't think this book anyway is quite as strange, as wildly strange as Mieville's Baslag, nor is it as well, I don't want to say hard to understand, but it wasn't quite as esoteric as Black Leopard Red Wolf. This book is pretty straightforward for the most part. I mean, there is some bits of unreliable narrator in here because Piranesi is. We'll get into it. Um, but this is one of those books because Colin. I don't know if you ever have ran into this kind of fear slash angst about the fantasy genre, but there's sometimes where I feel like that I fear that all of these fantasy novels are just kind of the same thing, and I feel like fantasy is losing its spark a little bit. But then I'll pick up something like Piranesi, and I remember why I enjoy the fantasy genre, or at least that's how I reacted. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think I've been kind of interspersing some reads like Piranesi when I can find them, and also, I first of all I agree with your point when reading, when I'm just reading fantasy book after fantasy book, and again, I'm not saying that this is a bad thing because I'm a massive fan of fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
but it can grow a bit stale at times, and I need kind of genre switch or just something to really surprise me and kind of, you know, just make me take a step back and evaluate what I thought the fantasy genre was capable of. And this is one of those books that I feel like really puts on an interesting display of what a master of this specific genre and the craft of writing can do within the bounds of this genre because it's very out there. It's very uh, it's a concept that I feel like in the wrong hands might not work very well. But Susanna Clarke is tremendous at writing, and
Mm.
I think she nailed this execution.
Yeah, this was actually my first book from her, and I know I have friends who I deeply respect who adore Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, but I'm like, you know what? Piranesi's shorter, and I want to see what the fuss is about. It's one of those books. I wanted to see what everyone was kind of flocking about. There's even some blurbs in here from let's see, we got David Mitchell blurbing this, and Madeline Miller, who wrote Circe, the Greek mythology book. Um, so yeah, clearly some big people like this book, and what did I think of it? I thought this was really good. It was a very entrancing mystery, I must say. It's one of those books that really took a hold of you and didn't let you go. Though, again, we'll get to it. Did you have any other thoughts, Colin?
Well, it depends. Are we going to go into spoiler territory, or are
Oh
we just kind
well.
of giving our general thoughts still?
Well, just getting it out of the way. I like this book, so I liked it a
Yeah,
lot. It was on my top 10 last year. So I think same with you as well. You also really enjoyed it.
yeah. It's one of those books that the hype. I didn't read it when it was. I think what 2 years ago is when this book was really. It was either 2 or 3 years ago that everyone was kind of shouting to get to Piranesi, and I didn't quite read it when the hype was at its peak. I waited a little bit,
Mm-hmm. Same here.
but for me, it lived up to the hype. If I would have read it at the peak of the hypeness, I don't know if it would have, you know,
Also,
landed.
it came out in 2020, so that was not a fun period in my life. I'll put it that way. I won't go too. You can read in between the lines there, as my friend Josh likes to say.
Yeah.
Um, but
No, but this one lived up to the hype for me. I thought, it was a very ambitious idea that was well executed.
oh yeah, this
Um,
book's great. I enjoyed it a lot. So yeah, I guess that's it for the non spoiler bit. So just to remind everyone, if you have not read this book yet, here's the spoiler section. You've been warned. Read this book, then come back and then watch the rest of this. And yeah, so yeah, that's basically all I got to say there. You've been warned, so don't go down there being like, you spoiled it. I'm like, hey, we said it here, or I did anyway. So spoilers. Um, but yeah, so basically, this is a very intimate book, unlike her other novel, which I bet this is why she probably put it out, because she wanted to do something a little more intimate. At least if she didn't want to do. I've heard she has started working on a sequel for Jonathan Strange, but I'm not sure. I'm not. I haven't read that book yet, nor am I very familiar with Susanna Clarke. She's a tad reclusive.
yeah, she definitely seems to be.
Uh but yeah. So the book basically follows it basically follows about two, three, four people. So we have Piranesi, the main character of the story. We have the other, who is this mysterious other person, no pun intended, who's in the place. Who's looking for this strange occult, it's kind of Lovecraftian. I'll get into it. Called the Great and Secret Knowledge, and there's also a character called the Prophet, and then there's another one called 16. Um, basically, we end up following Piranesi's perspective, and we realize. And one of the things I like is that Clark really gives the breadcrumbs as the story moves along that something isn't quite right. Because Piranesi, despite his rather childlike innocence, he knows some things that someone like him, who claims all he's known is this house, should not know. So I thought it was interesting. What did you think of Piranesi, Colin?
I think that first of all, intimate is a good way to put how we get at least get to know Piranesi's character because we're getting these it's epistolary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting these letters written by Piranesi. Uh, I don't know if it's quite daily, but they're journal entries that Piranesi is writing about their day,
Pretty much.
whatever day that may be. And whatever happens that sticks out to Piranesi in that day, they write about, or if something feels off, or if they just have a very mundane day where they're doing tasks around the house that they deem noteworthy, they write about them in these journal entries. So we're getting this look into how Piranesi thinks, how Piranesi operates, and I think it was a very engaging method of character building because
Mm-hmm.
to me it was very apparent what type of person Piranesi was after maybe like the first 15 or 20 pages of reading these journal entries. Piranesi is a very resourceful person, a very inquisitive person, a very curious person about their surroundings, a very kind of hesitant person, a person that's okay with being on their own
Mm-hmm.
in this world. Like you get a good sense of the type of person that Piranesi is because we're getting these firsthand accounts of just what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that that was cool. That was I've read other epistolary style books before, but I really enjoyed learning about this character in that fashion.
I'll admit, and I think I've heard you say something similar, but I'm not really the biggest fan of epistolary style because I just find it's kind of. I'll just put it this way: it's not really for me. But there are the occasional books, like this one, or Perks of Being a Wallflower, that I think really do it well. Um, I really think it's done well in this book. It didn't bother me too much. I really love how Piranesi uses phrases. Like, I love how he describes the years, like the year the albatross flew into the. Let me actually find it here. I like how he describes the years. Um,
Oh yeah,
when the moon rose in the third northern hall, the year's called, and the year that the albatross came to the southwestern halls. I don't know why, I just really like that. It gives character, but it also gives you the inkling again that there's something off here, even though we're in this kind of strange, somewhat wondrous place.
yeah, because it seems like there's this. I don't know if it's the house's method of time tracking or if Piranesi came up with it, but it's not the same as our world, but it also uses some of the same terms as our world, like the year. So like Piranesi is obviously aware of a term like a year and what that means, but it's not set up like a normal calendar.
Yeah, and
With like it doesn't
also
say
he says.
January or March, it says things like you just said.
But I think what's interesting is that, like, he says in the book that all he's known is the house, even though he knows things that we know, like years. He knows what a fawn is. He knows certain animal types. And again, I like she sets it up from the very beginning, and it's really a confident. It's she writes with a lot of confidence. I think she really
Oh
trusts
yeah,
the audience.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, so Piranesi meets with this other person called the Other, who's this mysterious man who kind of goes back and forth between um the house and another place that we don't know. Though if you put two and two together quickly, you'll probably figure out um what he's heading back to. But Colin, I guess I'll ask you this because I don't want to dance around this topic too much, but when did you start suspecting that the other was not who he said he was? Like, when did you suspect something was off about him?
I think so. Piranesi has seemed rather hesitant to, I guess, building a relationship with the other. So they have
Mm-hmm.
this. They meet twice a week
Yeah.
at this set time, and the other we learned very early on, probably maybe before anything else, really is like the other is bringing Piranesi some very basic supplies like
Mm-hmm.
shoes. I think vitamins, just random stuff um, that could prove useful in this crazy environment that Piranesi is living in. So we're kind of set up to be like, is this other somebody that's helping Piranesi? Are they
Mm-hmm.
friendly, or is this just, you know, it's strange. But I think when I first started to get an inkling that the other may have some malintent behind their relationship with Piranesi
Ill
was
intent, you
when
mean?
they, yeah, ill intent, sorry. They would get angry after they would ask Piranesi to help them find the great and secret knowledge.
mm.
And Piranesi was like hesitant or didn't want to help the other. The other would get irritable and angry and short with Piranesi and uh, kind of demanding, like, you need to help me find this great and secret knowledge. That's what this is all about. That's why we meet. Uh, and so that gave me a weird feeling like, oh, this guy is a little bit unhinged, maybe, it seems.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess I was already kind of like, who is this guy? But I think when I started kind of sussing him out, as the kids like to say, is when he started blatantly gaslight when he started blatantly gaslighting Piranesi. I'm like, he is not subtle at all about it. He's all like, "Oh, hey, is there anyone else in the house?" And he's like, "No, there is this one person though, and if you talk to him, you might go crazy." Or there's also
Yeah,
one point where he's like, "Hey, what about this thing?" And he's like, "Oh, you already told me this before. You're just, you're probably forgetting. You're being in the house too long." And I'm like, okay, something's up with this guy.
yeah,
He's
yeah,
clearly
absolutely.
he's
I mean,
clearly possessive, we'll say.
and with the very obvious naming of the person as the other, it kind of explores that theme of other. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's not necessarily a word that has positive connotations.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned that. Yeah, he's definitely something. Yeah, like when you hear the other, you think maybe of this like you don't get it. It's not a good connotation when you hear that word.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I can see where you're coming from there. Um.
And then you mentioned 16,
Oh yeah,
who,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
um, so I think an interesting, an interesting reason as to why 16 is 16 is that Piranesi has named or associated a number with 14 skeletons.
yeah. I was actually gonna bring that up. I'm glad you brought it up. I was like, oh man,
Yeah.
we forgot
So
that.
there's 14 skeletons that are scattered throughout the house
hmm
that Piranesi hasn't named like we would traditionally name something,
Uh
but
huh.
refers to them as, like, I think skeleton 13, or and will write about certain attributes about that skeleton. So there's obviously this Piranesi, there's the other, and the other's mention of somebody named 16,
hmm
which would be another living person. So there were theoretically there's three living people, and the other is warning Piranesi to stay away from 16
Or yeah, or else
under
you
any circumstances.
or else he'll go crazy. Um,
Yes.
and another thing I find interesting is that he basically I don't know if it's on purpose, but it's almost like he's telling you what he did, basically, because as we learn later, what he did, because he's like the house takes your memory after if you stay there for long enough, you end up going or not going crazy. Well, kind of going crazy, but also you lose your memories over time, and you kind of grow to um, lose the or what is it? You kind of form another identity, I guess, something
Yeah.
like that.
Essentially, that's what the other is warning Piranesi is happening. And like you mentioned by the gaslighting, saying things like, "Oh, we've already talked about this multiple times. Like, so you need to be careful. The house is doing this to you."
Yeah, I
And
mean,
Piranesi is like, "What?"
yeah, I mean, I mean, I don't mean to sound like the like typical 2020 kid, but like, it's like, yeah, he's literally manipulating him, like he's not even trying to hide it. Like he's just like, yeah, we've had this conversation before. Uh, don't you know, he's like, you shouldn't stay so much in the house. You know, it erodes your memories after a while, anyway. But
So yeah, so then I guess a development happens that the
mm-hmm.
other did not warn Piranesi about, and
Well, nor did he
Piranesi,
anticipate.
nor did he anticipate, and it's the appearance of the prophet.
Yeah. Um, which funnily enough, I didn't notice this till a little later on when we were, kind of hanging out and talking about it. But one of the epigraphs in the book is actually from the prophet because we end up learning his real name in the story, Lawrence Arn Sales, which
Oh, I didn't realize that.
yeah, I didn't realize that either till later, but yeah, that's literally one of the guys from the story, which I thought was really um, I thought was an interesting detail. But yes, he ends up meeting the prophet, who is this kind of older man who, for some reason or another, tells Piranesi about several things. He also mentions the other, and he's like, "The other? Who are you talking about? You mean Ketterly?" And then you're like, "Wait a minute, what's going on here?" And he claims that the house is he calls it this is what the Wikipedia page says, a distributory world, which is formed by ideas coming out of another world base. So it's kind of my theory is that this place. Well, I know you have your theory about what the house is, but basically, from how Sales describes it, it's almost like this is where we get magic from. Like, this is where we get, like, occult rituals from, basically. Kind of Sandman-y, if you will. If you anyone's read comics, it kind of reminded me of that a little bit. Well,
Yeah,
at least the beginning of that story, anyway.
yeah, it's kind of. I mean, we up until this point don't know still really what the heck this place is. Like, there's this almost, I don't want to say gaslighty. That's not the right word, I don't think, but there's this deception, intentional deception by Susanna Clarke, it feels, where, I found myself questioning, like, is this really happening? Like, is this place real, or is this
Yeah.
imaginary, or is this just a fantasy, like fictional world that is real in this place? Like, I really didn't know. And I suppose the meeting of the prophet didn't necessarily help me in any way because
I think it was
it
meant to be
did.
a little obtuse, so I don't blame you if
Well,
you
it
didn't get it. I mean, I don't fully under that. What I just said, that's just a theory I threw out. I don't know if it's, I don't know if it's the, like, I don't know if that's what she. I mean, we would have to ask Susanna Clarke, and to be honest, I don't think she would ever tell us. So, yeah.
yeah, but the coming of the prophet is interesting because it does to me what it seemed to have to do to Piranesi in the book, where immediately is just throwing a wrench into everything that Piranesi thought they might know. Like, who are you, and why are you telling me that the other isn't the other, and that the other is Ketterly, and why are and should I believe you? Because some of the things you're saying make sense, but also like, who are you? I've known Ketterly for long time now, but you just wandered in here, so it's creating this kind of confusion and this self doubt within Piranesi about what is really going on here. Like, do I listen to Ketterly? Do I listen to this man called the Prophet? Um,
I think what's interesting, one of the things I have to praise Susanna Clarke for is I really like it. If this were under a lesser writer, I think people would think of Piranesi as like an idiot or like a schmuck or something. But I'm glad that she makes him intelligent enough to not only just not take the other's word for it, because one of the things I like about Piranesi is he's not just blindly taking his word for it. I mean, I think if he did blindly take his word for it, I don't think it would be as effective a story.
I agree.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Um,
Uh,
and that, but yeah, seeing the prophet kind of makes Piranesi start to question everything he's been told. Like, who is this Ketterly guy? Who is this weird old man? Why did he tell me all this? Where even am I? And also, who am I? Because, we don't even know if Piranesi's his actual name.
right. That's how we've always known them. Kind of just like Piranesi's always known the other as the other.
Um, so Piranesi decides instead of just, it could have gone into that kind of whimsy. It could have, I'll put it this way, it could have become really British after a moment. And luckily it is British, but it's not too British, if that makes sense. Like, it doesn't go, it doesn't go into those, like, British stereotypes where the guy's just walking around like, oh, look how cool this all is, all that.
Yeah.
Um, God, I'm gonna get blasted by my UK fans. Um, so Piranesi decides. I like that he. I'll put it this way. I like that Piranesi is a bit naive, but he's not stupid.
No, not at all. Very resourceful, and to be able to survive in this environment uh, requires him to do a lot of the things that Piranesi does, like keep track of the tides and try to follow when the levels of the house will flood and when they won't, and pays attention to the albatrosses and
Oh
needs
yeah, the
to
house
create.
floods. By the way, I forgot to mention
Yeah,
that.
it needs to create things to with very limited resources to help just get through this environment. So we get the sense that Piranesi, like you said, is not stupid, but
No,
maybe a little. I don't know. I don't know what the term is.
I mean I would say a little naive, but like he's a little like he's a bit whimsical, but again, he's not stupid by any stretch. That doesn't make him stupid.
Yeah, that's a
Like,
good
he
way to put
doesn't,
it.
like, I don't think, like, he doesn't just take the other's word for it, you know? And
Yes.
Also, he's also just a naturally curious guy. So, of course he has to question things. It's kind of a part of being curious.
Right.
Anyway, so Piranesi starts going through some old journals he kept, and he ends up discovering, quite oddly, some old notes he had taken, and then we see them listed under years as we know them, and that's ultimately how we eventually get some of the backstory.
Yep.
So basically, the
Yeah.
entries tell the story of a guy named, like I said earlier, Lawrence Arnsales, who I'll put it this way. I think he was the prophet. I think it's all but said that he's the prophet. I could be wrong.
That's what I thought too.
But a guy named Lawrence Arnsales had basically put out there that other worlds existed, and he was going to find a way to access that other world. Um, and Ketterly, or the other, or whoever the other is, was one of his students at one point. And Sales had garnered this sort of cult, basically. And the cult are said to have accessed this. They eventually got arrested for capturing this guy called James Ritter. And Ritter basically explained that he was held captive in this place, which sounds an awful lot like the house that we're in. So yeah, if anyone is, you know, anyone can probably put two and two together on what happened there.
Yeah, and so Piranesi is immediately like, "What the heck is going on now?" Um,
Yeah, now he's real suspicious. He's like, what?
of everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's like, you know what? He basically just pulls the old, you know what? Screw it. It could go worse. Not talking to 16, so I'm gonna see who 16 is.
Yeah,
Um,
so then they start to not directly correspond with each other, but through messages.
yeah, they start leaving like messages through like rocks and like maybe sand. I could be wrong. Again, I read it in November, so my memory is a little hazy. Um,
Yeah, it's been a while for me too, but Wikipedia helps
yeah,
bring some of
Wikipedia
it
is
back.
great. Thank God we live in the age of the internet, man. Um, so Piranesi ends up learning that 16 has entered the house. And he's like, oh crap. And then he decides, you know what? Again, like I said earlier, he's like, you know what? Screw it. My world has been rocked. I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to risk going insane if that means figuring out who this 16 is. Because again, the other, I would say, kind of underestimated Piranesi's curiosity. Um, so they start leaving notes for each other. And eventually, Piranesi ends up discovering a message saying, "Are you Matthew Rose Sorensen?" And when he reads that name, Piranesi then gets a flash to a different part of his life. Another little funny thing, Beard of Darkness, if I remember right, his name is also Matt Sorensen, so I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
So I was curious when he would read. I was curious when he would read, um, oh, Piranesi, and see that. I was curious what he might think of that. But I
That
haven't,
is funny.
But yeah, it's pretty funny. Um, but Piranesi ends up kind of, realizing like, wait a minute, and then the mystery kind of unfolds from there. Which I have to say to Susanna Clarke, she's probably not gonna watch this. Well, maybe unless I like blow up in some weird way on YouTube anyway, not literally. Like if I blow up, maybe she'll see it. But I have to commend her a lot for how she wrote this mystery, because man, it is so enthralling, and you really like. I wanted to know what was going
Oh yeah.
on. What did you think of the mystery?
I can't say that I know still what's going on, but that's part of the charm of it because I think it leaves a lot open for interpretation of what anyone that read it might think actually ended up happening. Uh, so we learn with the missing journal entries and the reveal of who 16 is, that this guy Piranesi, aka Matthew Rose Sorensen, is actually a journalist
Oh,
that was
geez. Now I'm just gonna
writing.
think he looks like Matt from Bearded Darkness. Just his big beard in the house.
Yeah, yeah. So well, anyways, he's a journalist that happened to be writing about this guy named Arn Sales,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the whole cult thing. Uh, so, like you mentioned, the flashback whenever Piranesi initially read the name, they got like it stirred something in them, and they got this vision of like a city, like
Uh-huh.
a
Yeah.
a big city that they don't know where this came from. So we, as the reader, I was this whole kind of, as the reveal was
I
happening
think
and
that
the
was my
mystery was
biggest
kind
just
of unfolding.
WTF is going on here at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know who to believe anymore because up until this point, I mean, because of the epistolary nature of this book, like you're just kind of naturally in Piranesi's corner,
Uh-huh.
and believing what they're saying. But at this point, I was like, what is going on here? Like, who is sane in this entire cast?
Yeah. Yeah. Um but yes, as you mentioned, he had gone to interview Ketterly, and because he was writing a book about Lawrence Arndt Sales, and when he went to interview him, I guess that Ketterly did some boogaloo magic stuff and imprisoned him in the house. So now we know that the other definitely is Ketterly. There is no doubt now. And Matt Sorensen, not Beard of Darkness Matt Sorensen, the Matt Sorensen Piranesi Matt Sorensen, is Piranesi.
Mic drop.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And he also calls, and also he eventually loses his memory and end up creating this new identity with Ketterly called Piranesi. So if anyone is curious, Piranesi was actually an Italian, which is a reference to an Italian architect, artist, either or. I'm not entirely sure. But he's well known for creating these bizarre images of labyrinths, of like labyrinths and like houses and rooms and corridors, or corridors, um, and it kind of gives you an idea, or at least when I read this, it gave me an idea on what the house was supposed to look like, or at least when I saw those images. I'm like, oh, okay, that's what she's going for. Okay,
Yeah,
I don't know if you had a
it's funny. Well, I didn't know this before I read it until I started to look up, Wikipedia and different stuff afterwards. But yeah, if you go and look at some of the artwork that this artist did, it's very apparent where the inspiration for the house came from. And it was really cool to kind of just see how my vision of what the house looked like kind of compared to some of the inspiration that Susanna Clarke pulled from to create this world. Because some of the pictures really looked like what the house could have looked like.
yeah, and and that also kind of sparks. It kind of feeds in my theory that like this place is sort of a door, a sort of place where magic and the imagination where that comes from. Again, I could be wrong, and I mean, if you want to tell your own theories, comment down below. And Colin has some interesting theories as well, which I'm sure we'll hear by the end. Um, but yeah, so Piranesi is actually a guy called Matthew Sorensen, and Sorensen, um, journalist who got kidnapped, pretty much, and he got set in to the house, trapped.
Yeah, I'm unsure if this. So in my head, the way that this all happened was Sorensen was there just to gather information from
Mm-hmm.
Ketterly about what was going on with this whole entire situation. And I just kind of pictured it being like Ketterly said, "Oh, let me show you like what we do or what
Yeah.
Sales was doing, what the ritual was." And then like all of a sudden it was like, "Gotcha, like
Yeah.
now you're stuck."
Yeah, because he stupidly told him that he came by himself and no one knew he was going over there. I'm like, oh my god, you're just asking to get trapped.
Yeah. Yeah, you can just see Ketterly going like, "Oh, is that right?"
Exactly. Yeah, that's pretty much. I'm like, oh my god, this dude's plotting on him. Oh, and then he's like, oops, you're trapped. And you're like, this guy.
So, yeah, just that was like a goofy just that scene in my head was just funny. I don't know why.
Yeah, no, it was kind of, it's kind of like what? Like, okay. Um, so there's been this flood that's been mentioned a few times because Piranesi's grown kind of used to the house, and occasionally, for whatever reason, the house floods. So you don't want to drown. So you just kind of chill on a. He like either he climbs on a statue or something, or he creates something, or I think either both. Maybe he's done both, where he created like a little raft where he can kind of
Yeah,
float
I
on
think
it.
I think both.
Because again, as fool as naive as he can be, for sure. Again, he's not a fool. So I think that's when he meets 16. Again, my memory's a little hazy because I remember I do remember that they confront Ketterly together, but I don't remember how they met.
I think uh well eventually Piranesi goes to Ketterly to kind of confront Ketterly about what is going on.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that was the day of the flood.
Yeah.
And on that same day, I think Raphael just happened to be coming back to check on Piranesi.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when they met the first time on the day of
Oh
the
yeah,
flood.
that's right. I think you're right. That I think they just ran into each other as they were about to confront Ketterly. So basically, he goes over to Ketterly and goes, "Hey man, what gives? I was
What
this
the heck?
this old man showing up and telling me stuff, and I'm learning here I might be someone else. What'd you do?" And he's all like, he basically just pulls the old jigs up. I guess I'm gonna have to kill him now. So he pulls a gun. Then we meet 16, who ends up being revealed to be a police detective called Raphael, which I thought that had to be a reference to, well, not Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but one of the painters that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is based on. I would not be shocked if that were a reference to that. So they throw down, and well, I say throw down. I use that term loosely because really, what happens is they confront each other. Then the flood happens. Ketterly tries to shoot them, fails. Tries to get on a boat, if I remember, that he created, and but he gets knocked off the boat, and then he drowns. But of
Yep.
course, Piranesi, because even though the other was kind of a dick to him, he still tries to save his life. even though Ketterly trapped him and manipulated him and did all this pretty bad stuff.
Yeah, that was a crazy scene. That whole uh, flood scene was very different and action packed compared to the rest of the entire novel, and it happened so quickly.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to me because I remember reading on a site I use called TV Tropes, and there's sometimes there's this thing called they wasted a perfectly good plot, um, where they basically were like, well, it would be interesting, like what would have this book been like if it were from Raphael's perspective from the beginning, because I would be curious to see how that would have come to how she would have put things together. But I do like at the same time how this is basically a mystery from the victim's perspective at the same time. Also, magical house. That's cool.
Oh yeah,
I mean, as much as it would have been fun to see a police mystery turn into a weird fantasy thing, I mean, the house is just cooler. Like I want
yeah,
to know more about this house, which is another thing I like. I like that as Piranesi wants to know more, the audience as well wants to know. So Piranesi's kind of an audience
yeah.
surrogate in that way.
Their Piranesi's curiosity just about the world around them, the house,
Mm-hmm.
is definitely contagious.
Indeed, yes, that's what I really like about Piranesi. But going back, so the water recedes. Ketterly's dead now, and Raphael basically goes, "Hey, I'm a cop from our world, and yeah, I was investigating some disappearances that were related to the sales cult, and then that kind of put to my mind a little bit. I thought about the other corpses, the skeletons, and I put it together. That was the cult. Like it had to be. I don't
Yeah,
know any other explanation that makes sense, at least to me anyway.
that's what I kind of gathered as well.
Yeah, I know that
Just
might
other
be
missing people.
like he basically tricked all those people into going into that house, and eventually they went crazy and probably died. Piranesi's just one of those people who did not. So she basically goes like, "Hey, you're Matt Sorensen. You've been gone for a whopping 6 years. You need to come back." And Piranesi's kind of chafes at this. He's like, "Well, this is my home. This is my house. I live here." But she's,
It's the house.
it's the house, yes. But Raphael understands that he's gone through a pretty crazy event. So she's like, "All right, I'll give you the choice. If you want to stay, fine. If you want to leave, cool." So he deliberates on this, and eventually he decides to leave the house because he's like, "You know what? I want to see what this other world's like. Well, our world anyway." And that is when we get to the epilogue, where we meet Matt Sorensen slash Piranesi slash someone else, because he
Yeah,
says at the end of the story, he says that he doesn't really feel like Matt Sorensen anymore, but at the same time he doesn't quite feel like Piranesi anymore either. So I think there's some interesting stuff to talk about there. He ends up meeting James Ritter, who was if you didn't put it together already, was a previous victim of Ketterly and also Arn's sale, and brings him back to the house. And he also decides to tend to Ketterly's body and put him among the other 14 members of the which is again kind of where it clicked for me what that must have been, because again it had to have been
yeah,
the cult. It could not have been anyone else. But basically he says at the end of the story that he doesn't any longer feel like Sorensen, but he also doesn't feel like Piranesi much either. So he has to construct another identity from the remnants of the other two, and that is the end of the story. So yeah. Now, Colin, I'll let you discuss your theory real quick, which I thought was really fascinating.
Oh yeah, I don't know, man. This book is kind of open ended. I mean, we obviously get like a conclusion to the mystery, and get revealed who the players are, who the characters really are, and not just the other and the prophet. But I don't know. I got this notion that, and again, this is a theory. I'm not saying that this is right or anything, but it felt to me like this almost could have been like Sorensen just went absolutely crazy, like got abused and was going through extreme trauma, being held captive by Ketterly, and that the house was never actually physically real. It was real in his mind, but I kind of pictured maybe Sorensen was locked like in a basement type dungeon place with these other 14 dead bodies and just was losing his absolute mind from the stuff that Ketterly was feeding him, the information Ketterly was feeding him. And I started thinking about, like, okay, they meet twice a week. That seems to me like maybe Ketterly is just doing research on what's happening to Sorensen and like bringing him supplies down to this dungeon every couple of weeks, or every 2 days a week, uh, and then leaving and
Mm-hmm.
coming back and like
He going on with his normal life. I hear you.
and going on with his normal life. And then Ketterly was also like extremely cautious about 16, but doesn't tell Sorensen who 16 is. But Ketterly knows that the cops are after Ketterly and doesn't want Sorensen to like further incriminate Ketterly if they get caught. So I started thinking, like, what if this entire thing is just a crazy imagination, like Piranesi just lost their mind and they genuinely believe that they're in a house and that all of this stuff is happening, but that the flood never really happened and all this was just like the police busting into somebody's house and actually just catching him.
Well, I guess I found it kind of interesting you said that because, like, because that just kind of puts you in the whole narrative into question because you're just like, well, okay, like what's the proof of this? Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong.
Yeah, I don't
I
know.
don't know, but I mean, that's an interesting theory. I thought. I guess I should ask this because, well, I asked you before and you had some interesting answers. What do you think the ending means?
I so operating on my theory, it felt to me like we're just seeing
Mm,
the you know what can happen, the fallout of somebody that has been traumatized and mentally abused and probably physically abused for years.
mm-hmm.
Enough
Yeah.
so that they completely disregarded their old identity and created an entirely new identity. And then when the criminal was discovered in Ketterly and Sorensen was saved, uh, had to come to grips with the fact that that happened and that was actually a part of their life for 6 years. And so they don't feel like Sorensen anymore and they don't feel like Piranesi anymore. So they just have to try to operate in the world as a conglomeration of those two people and create a new identity, because I can't imagine being like in that scenario for 6 years.
Yeah, I remember you saying that in our last conversation, and I thought that was actually a perfect way to describe it. It's like an extended metaphor for trauma. It's kind of like how do you deal? Because like a lot of people say, a lot of people use as like a metaphor, like that part of me died that day when this certain horrible thing happened to me. I kind of viewed it as like a more
Yeah.
literal version of that, because because he went through this horrible thing, so he's not quite Matt Sorensen anymore. So he has
Yeah,
to kind of form who he's going to be now after this horrible experience. So I'm kind of just echoing what
and
what you
just
were saying.
yeah, like come to grips with the fact that this happened, you know. Um,
Like I've heard a
and
lot
then
of.
like obviously,
Oh, sorry. Finish
go
your
ahead.
thought.
Well, Raphael was even, trying to be really respectful of where Piranesi or Sorensen was mentally,
Mm-hmm.
directly after this, like, do you want to go back to the house? Like, do you want to come with me? Like, what do you want to do? Not trying to say like, hey, dude, you're crazy. None of this is real.
Yeah,
Or,
he wouldn't. He probably wouldn't have been as receptive if she had
no,
done that.
but yeah, she was being very tentative and like respectful of just where Piranesi was, wherever that was. I don't even know.
Yeah, but I've seen I've seen a couple of interviews about people who were abused or from people who knew people who had been abused. And I thought it was really interesting when you said that the first time about it being kind of like a metaphor for trauma. Because again, I had heard a lot of people mention that, like, my friend was a completely different person after they met this person who started, like, beating their ass or, whatever the hell they were doing, you know? So, I'm like, wow,
Yeah,
that's really well said, Colin.
if maybe Susanna Clarke watches it and she goes, no, dude, it was just a really cool, fantastical house.
Yeah. She'll probably just be like, these two are going nuts. But I do think the trauma thing is definitely true. Or at least I think so. Maybe she'll just be like, I don't know. I just thought it would be weird. I don't know if she would say that.
That would be awesome. If
That
that's what she said, that would be awesome.
would be funny.
I would
But
love it.
but yeah, I think what's also interesting, because it kind of brings up a theme I hadn't brought up before, but there's also this theme of identity in Piranesi, because like Piranesi's sort of stuck between his identity as Piranesi and his identity as Matt Sorensen, which is kind of lost pretty much. And when he gets out of the
Yeah, absolutely.
house, he kind of doesn't know who he is anymore. He's kind of like, who am I going to be now? Now that, because, he was in the house for a very long time, and, he grew to really love the house, and, he had a bit of I don't know if I would say it's a comfortable life, because, Ketterly was not nice to him, but, like, he was happy with that life, and, like, how is he going to come to terms with who he is now? Like, who is he going to be
Yeah,
now?
that was a good point you made because he never seemed in his journal entries, he never made it seem like he was being abused or never made it seem like he didn't enjoy being there. He just kind of spoke of things in a very matter of fact way. Like, this is what I did today.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I think is going with the flooding. Like, it didn't feel like he felt he was under the thumb of Ketterly. He just kind of thought the other was a bit of a strange person and that they met twice a week.
Yeah, like if I remember right, I think he like viewed the other as like a friend of some sort, like his only kind of friend when he was in the
The
house.
only other
And
living person he interacted with.
yeah, that's for sure. He definitely would. Yeah, I bet that probably messed him up a little bit. He's like basically like his whole life was kind of a lie. Not even kind of. It basically was a lie. So I like how
Yeah,
she kind of leaves it open ended. Like, okay, how's he gonna cope with this realization? But again, I might be thinking too
yeah, I
deeply
like.
into it, but that's kind of what I got from it, for sure.
Well, I think the kind of vagueness of it lends itself to theories and discussing, and I think it's cool that different people have a different, thought process on what actually went on in this book. Because I've heard a bunch of different people talk about it and listened to a bunch of different reviews after I read it, just because I loved it so much. And every seems like every review that I would watch that had spoilers, people were talking about it in a way that I hadn't been thinking about it, or they were bringing things up that I hadn't thought of. And I thought, man, that's really cool to write a book that can generate that much different, that many different routes to go down.
Well, that is what great books do. At least I think so. Well, I know so. There's a lot of books
Yeah.
out there. Uh, you know, um, though I mean, not to knock on books that are very clear about what they mean, but I guess my
Right.
interpretation is like it's kind of her reflecting on not only trauma but also identity. Like who is Piranesi gonna be now? He's no longer in the house, though. He visits. It's shown that he visits. Like, will he go back to the house?
Yeah.
Like, will he feel out of place in the world? Like, how is he gonna cope with this new reality? Or, well, new reality. It's his original reality.
Yeah.
No, there's a lot of there's some mind screwery there.
Oh, yeah. I can only imagine what Piranesi feels like, or
Um,
Sorensen.
but she leaves it up to you ultimately, and
She does.
yeah. So I guess what were some favorite moments of this book for you? Like, what were some books moments that really stuck out for you?
I I think I said the same thing the last time we talked about this, but I think just it's not a unique one, I'm sure. But the moment where Piranesi starts to find the missing journal pieces,
Mm-hmm.
and starts to just piece all of this together, and that leading action up to the reveals of who these people actually are, and just that sense of confusion and doubt that Susanna Clarke was able to deliver with that scene unfolding where they're finding the missing journal entries and creating self-doubt in Piranesi, which is creating doubt in me as the reader, and then like just me just being at one point like, what is actually going on here? Like I remember thinking that, like, what is happening? Like every time I thought I had an inkling of what was going on, some little thing would happen. And I'd be like, dang, like maybe that's not right either. And then this was like it threw everything for a loop.
Oh yeah, no, I was about to say I think one of my favorite parts, aside from just how well crafted the mystery was, I really loved Piranesi's reflections of the world. Like there's one part where he wonders what birds are thinking when they fly. Love it. I love that. I
I
really
forgot about that. That's a good.
um
That was awesome.
Also, again, like you, I really liked how that mystery really came together, and also when he gets captured, and you're just like, oh no, oh what you
Yeah,
didn't, oh what you didn't tell anyone that you were heading over here. Oh, I wonder what's gonna happen.
silly, just silly.
But at the time, I was like, oh no, this isn't gonna end well.
Yeah,
I also really
sense of
liked.
impending doom.
I also really liked the idea of the great and secret knowledge. We never figure out what it is, and it kind of gives
Nope.
it this. I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with H.P. Lovecraft's work, but there's this kind of Lovecraftian element where it's like this thing that man is not meant to know, and we shouldn't trifle with it. And
Huh.
I thought that was. I don't know if that was like conscious. Like, I don't think of like Clarke as like a cosmic horror writer, but I definitely felt like that element was there, and I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, I also like that that was left just to be thought about. It was
Also,
not explained. There was no resolution.
I generally like magic that's less explained. So that's just I just dig that in general. I mean, I don't want to
Yeah,
knock Brandon Sanderson, but like I don't love his view on magic. I'm not a hard magic guy. And, I'm not knocking anyone
that's
who
fair.
likes that stuff. I just it's just not my cup of tea. Piranesi is more my kind of like, yeah, I like this. Sorry
Yeah,
if I'm
I
rambling.
overall, no, you're good. Overall, what she was able to accomplish in such a short book, I thought was fantastic.
I know. I wanted more. Like I'm like, man, you could have given like 200 more pages of this. I would have eaten that up, you know.
Yeah, so would I.
But yeah, no, it's but yeah, I really enjoy but yeah, what so some other favorite moments before we go to our final thoughts. Can't think of any. Well, aside from what you already mentioned, like the mystery coming together. Uh
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's it. In terms of favorite moments anyway.
Yeah, those are some of the big ones. There's the little ones like you mentioned, but I think, overall those are the ones that stuck out to me, like the flood scene and the one scene where, everything starts to get put together for
Mhm.
me.
Um another a but I think that's it in terms of like favorite moments anyway. I could be missing something. Someone will be like, "Oh yeah, remember this part?" And I'll be like, "Oh man, yeah." Um, the ending maybe. I like the ending. I thought the ending was really interesting. But that's
Yeah.
about it.
I felt okay with the ending too.
So yeah. So what are your final thoughts, Colin? Before we, I'll let you go first. Like, what are your like, man, like, or like some concluding thoughts you
So
have? I guess better way to put it.
there's I think that there's a couple books that I've read somewhat recently where I think that fantasy fans who may just want to take a step out of what traditional fantasy offers, and need like a change, Piranesi is 100% worth the investment of time because it's extremely well done, in my opinion, and very short.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a couple of books that I've read recently, and this is kind of what I wanted to touch on. Piranesi and The Spear Cuts Through Water, that I
Still need to
feel
read
like
that.
are written as fantasy books, but they are fantasy books that I feel like can transcend just the fantasy genre and fans of the fantasy genre, because I think that anyone that just enjoys reading fiction could read these two books and enjoy them, um, for what they are. So I think it reaches further than the fantasy genre, and I think as just a unique experience of reading, I think it's worth the time investment for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. I would go a step further. I would say this was it nearly touched that sublime feeling I'm always looking for when I'm reading a fantasy book. And it reminds me that fantasy is still capable of being magical. And I got the same feeling when reading this book that I do when I read like a Neil Gaiman book or something like that. So there you go. But
Well
yeah,
said.
but yeah, if anyone who has gotten this far wants to, well, we've kind of spoiled the whole thing, but if anyone wants to check this out, I think Piranesi is a fantastic book, a good one to read when you're well, a good one to read when you're feeling kind of burned out, but also a good one to read if you want something a little different.
I
So
concur.
yeah, I don't think there's too much more I can say about it, but yeah, Piranesi, really good book. Susanna Clarke, I'm looking forward to reading Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. You read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, didn't you? You were
I
going to do
have.
a conversation
We
about it.
might be rereading it soon. Yeah, we haven't. I was going to do a conversation with Alicia from Birdie in the Books. We haven't scheduled it yet. She's talking about potentially doing a reread of that. So I don't know for sure if I'm going to do that, but I might be rereading it soon.
Well, good luck. It's a thick boy. I don't know
I
how
hope you
long
enjoy
it's.
it.
I really do too. I mean, it's definitely an interesting fantasy. So, or it's definitely an interesting hook. But hoping it'll be like it, where I'll be entranced by the strangeness. and
I
hopefully
think
it'll
you will be.
be well worth the time, even though it's a whopping 1,000 pages long, like something like It or The Stand before the climax happens.
Yeah, it is a big one, but I think if you're enjoying it, it's a fun ride for sure.
I'll definitely give it a look next month. um,
Coming up.
yeah, no, I know I know. My God, it's coming up soon. But Colin, you got a YouTube channel. If you want to shill your social media before we get out of here, feel free.
Sure, yeah. Like I said in the beginning, you can find me on YouTube at Colin's Corner. I think you have to type in Colin's Corner YT
Mm,
to get my specific channel to come up. But I'm on Twitter. My handle is it's Colin's Corner YT, and Instagram as well, which is the same handle. So yeah, come stop by the channel. Check out some videos, leave some comments. I love interacting with people in the comments section, and follow my journey as I continue to read more books and share what I love.
you should. He has some good stuff on there. And I have been Britain. Well, I'm still Britain, but I am Britain who is signing off. So you can find me on Twitter. I know it's called X now, but I still call it Twitter. Habits. You can find me on uh, Goodreads and Letterbox, where I write reviews that are probably more coherent than the one you just heard right now. You can also find me on Discord. And I also like hearing from you. You know, like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Hit the like button. As my buddy John Minton likes to say, it feels good when you do it. Um, and comment, because I like reading comments from you guys. At least if you've read the book, you can comment. If you haven't read the book, well, go read the book and then come back here and then you can comment. But thank you, Colin, for joining me on this journey. It's been fun, and it
Yes,
took a
thank
minute.
you. Thank you for having me on the channel. This was a blast.
We should do this again at some point. I don't know with what. Well, we are
We will be
we are
very
going to
soon with
be
Cold Blood. In
talking
Cold Blood.
in Cold Blood soon, so I am looking forward to that. I actually got it over there. I don't want to pull it out though. Um, but yeah, I'm really hungry, so I'm gonna sign off before this goes on too long. But again, Colin, thank you so much for being patient with me during this weird spot in my life. I think it's yeah, it's been a ride. All
All we
right.
can do is keep riding.
All right. Until next time, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching. Until next. And check out Colin's work.
Bye, everybody.